Hi there, and welcome to today's webinar, How District Leaders Align Curriculum, Assessment, and Instruction for Student Success. My name is Kendall Hunter, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Otis. I'm excited to be your moderator for today. Like most, or probably all of you, my background's in education. I was a middle school special education teacher and reading specialist in the Chicagoland area where I am based. And yes, I am cold today. I hope you are somewhere warmer than I am. Today's webinar is going to be a true roundtable discussion. I have 4 K-12 leaders here to discuss what works when it comes to aligning curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and then how that impacts student learning. So really, we're going to get to the meat of why do we do this work? Why is alignment important? Before we jump into things, just a couple housekeeping items that I want to go through with you all. I mentioned that I'm with Otis, today's webinar sponsor. If Otis is new to you, welcome. Otis is a K-12 assessment, data, and insight solution, and we really provide schools with tools to align their assessment and grading practices so educators can really clearly communicate where students are in relation to the learning standards and curriculum that you're teaching in class. So we're excited to be here today. Before I introduce the panel, just want to run through a couple technical aspects, and then we'll jump into things. Please check the audio settings on your computer, as well as your speaker volume if you're having any trouble hearing us. If you continue to have issues, there is a detailed audio troubleshooting file available in the resource list under the Q&A window. If at any point something freezes on your end or you hear music going forward, just go ahead and refresh your browser, and that should solve any issues that you are having. Since this is a discussion, you may want to enlarge the media player within your console to really focus on our speakers for today. We do have some slides. I know I'll push a couple out to you here and there just to kind of keep us on track, but the focus is the conversation. So feel free to move things around on your console so that you have a good experience there and can focus on what the speakers are sharing. There are some other icons that open up additional features. Just want to call out the resource list. We have put together a number of resources for you there on how Otis supports common assessments, standards-based grading, just some free resources and downloads for you all there. So be sure to check those out. You can follow today's conversation on Twitter or X, if you've yet to adopt that into your vocabulary, using the hashtag EWWebinar, so EdWeekWebinar. And don't forget to tag Otis. We are at OTUSK12. As we jump into our discussion, it is a discussion, so we welcome your questions. There is a Q&A where you can type in your questions for the panel. We will have dedicated time at the end. I may be able to pop some in as we're going if they're on topic, but we appreciate your patience. We'll get through some of those questions at the end. Last but not least, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. This is accessible through edweek.org or using the same login that you used today. So to summarize, my favorite or most popular question that comes in, yes, this is being recorded. I know you all are probably very busy, maybe have some kids moving in and out or are multitasking. If you have to step away, do not worry, this is recorded so you can catch up on what you missed and maybe even share with a colleague to spread the word on what you learned from our experts today. So I'm going to do some introductions of the panel here. First, I'd like to introduce Stacy Bruton. Stacy has over 30 years experience using the Curriculum Leadership Institute model, or the CLI model, as you'll hear it called today, as a classroom teacher, curriculum director, and consultant. So lots of roles there. Stacy joined CLI in 2008, became the vice president in 2014, and president in 2020. We are very excited to have Stacy with us. We also have Dr. Chad Lang. Dr. Lang is the Assistant Superintendent of School Improvement at Glenwood Community School District in Iowa and has 2 decades of experience ranging from teacher to administrator and district leader. Under Dr. Lang's leadership, Glenwood achieved National PLC Model at Work district status, very impressive, and received a National Blue Ribbon Award from the U.S. Department of Education. Next up, I have Dr. Kristen Kopta. Dr. Kopta has served as a public school educator for the past 26 years, with the last 9 as the superintendent of Penoyer School District 79. If you haven't heard of Penoyer School, it is a 1-district school that serves approximately 450 preschool through 8th grade students and is located in the Chicago suburbs right near O'Hare Airport. So Kristen is also probably cold like I am in the Chicagoland area. although I'm not sure Nebraska or Iowa are any warmer at this point. But last but certainly not least, we have Jody Firestein. Jody is an elementary principal and special education director at Superior Public Schools in Nebraska. Jody has worked in public education for 21 years. All of those years have been in Superior Schools, and Jody's actually in her 4th year as the elementary principal there. Superior Schools has been working with CLI since 2018 and actually adopted Otis in 2020. Jody's elementary staff uses Otis to assess student outcomes based on Superior's local curriculum using standards reference grading. So as you can tell, we have a very full group here with lots of experience to bring to the conversation. The final piece of information I'm going to give you before I open up the floor here is just a little context. Context around the CLI model that you will hear mentioned today by the group. And Stacy will share more in just a moment, but the CLI model, as you'll see on your screen here, is a framework that all of our panelists have experience working with, really in order to align their school or district's curriculum, instruction, and assessment practices with their local governance. So by the end of the CLI model, or that assessment phase, schools have validated common assessments aligned to their local curriculums. That's kind of the goal that they were working for. But as you'll hear today, the process is a journey. With a unified approach, this ensures that the important work doesn't rest on one person's shoulders. That's really something that you'll hear as a theme today. And the end goal is students really understanding what they're working towards in terms of their instruction and learning targets. So what's more powerful than students knowing what they need to learn? So with that, we're going to just jump right into the conversation. Stacy, I am going to start with you here. I know you're very familiar with the CLI model. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the CLI model, kind of build on what I shared, and then elaborate on the journey to achieve horizontally and vertically aligned curriculum for the schools that you work with in your role?
Okay. Well, first, Kendall, I would like to thank you and Otis for hosting this opportunity for us to all share our success. And so we appreciate being able to build the leadership and also share our knowledge about the use of CLI. So to tell you a little bit about the CLI model, CLI was actually founded in 1991 by Dr. Stu Irve. And that was in response to support school districts in efforts of school improvement, specifically curriculum development. And so throughout time, our nonprofit continues to partner with school districts across the United States, specifically to help them with curriculum development, local curriculum aligned to standards. And then as we build leadership capacity through the governance piece, as you can see in our triangle, we also have districts that we provide support in the areas of instructional alignment to that local curriculum, along with developing common assessments. So that's just kind of CLI in a nutshell. And I'd like to try to summarize a little bit about the systematic approach that we use to help districts create aligned curriculum. So as I mentioned, we do value teacher leaders across the district, and we build leadership capacity. So as we start with the process, there is a content team made up of grade level representatives in a particular content area across the district. And those teacher leaders they are tasked with actually developing a local curriculum. And so our first step is to find out what's currently being taught across the district. And so they may survey or provide a questionnaire to all teachers of that content, and then they collect that information and organize it in a systematic coding process, very low tech, that I can remember doing when I was a first-year teacher. And our district had adopted the CLI model with Dr. Irve as our facilitator and consultant. So once the teacher leaders on the committee gather the information, then they organize it, and then they create what we call walls. And we utilize bulletin board paper, colored paper strips, and we map out the current topics. And then we have grade level walls for every grade or course. And then we place them side by side, maybe on a wall or in a large setting. And then we can see the gaps, redundancies, and maybe what's missing. For example, since we color code, we can often see if there's a content area, like geography. If there's no green, there's no geography being taught in the grade level. So we follow up with teachers, and after we follow up, then we take a standard document and then go through and check for alignment to those local topics. And if we have a missing standard, then we add that to our walls. And then we have the big lift, and that's when we do the K-12 alignment of topics across all grade levels. So we're looking for that vertical alignment to ensure that all of the learning targets that we want students to have are included. We're also going with content and rigor of the verb level of the curriculum, because that's critical to building a solid program. And that usually takes us a couple of days. And then from there, we provide curriculum literacy so they can develop common learning targets across a grade level. And that way there's horizontal alignment across the district.
I would love to see a picture of this process. You'll have to share that with me afterwards. I'm just imagining colors and organization. That sounds like a true experience for everyone to really be able to visually see that. So thank you for elaborating on kind of what that looks like. I loved that you said building the leadership capacity so that they can then empower the teacher leaders. Like we kind of alluded to in the beginning, this cannot be done by one person. It just simply can't. So we need to help people learn the process so everyone can really be bought into that, since this is something that teachers are going to be teaching. That buy-in seems like a huge component. Dr. Kupta, I want to toss it to you a little next here. I know Stacy alluded to kind of those common learning targets. When we think about curriculum and what is being taught, we know we have to look at those learning standards. How did your team at Pennoyer go about prioritizing and focusing on the most essential standards as part of this process?
Thanks, Kendall. Well, as you mentioned, I've been here for 9 years as a superintendent, and we've been working with CLI for 8. And we're small. We have 2 sections per grade level. And when I first came, our teachers were doing a great job of organizing curriculum, teaching standards horizontally with each other as partners, but not vertically, not preschool through 8th grade. So we knew we really needed to do a deep dive into curriculum and have a systemic process that would carry us through all the subject areas and have buy-in. So we worked with CLI, other districts in the area were using them, and it just seemed like a really good fit for us. And the buy-in really happened because it is completely an all-in process. So we started with science. That was a little bit more manageable for our first subject to take on, because when you think about, at least here in Illinois, science and social studies, kindergarten through 5th grade, is kind of a half-year curriculum. Usually teachers will teach 2 days of science, 2 days of social studies, and then the 5th day rotate between the 2. So we took that on first, and really, I think there was a lot of eye-opening with not just the holes and the gaps that we had in our curriculum when we really started to look at it vertically, but the systemic process of taking those standards, unpacking them, having teachers get into really rich conversations about how the standards build and what we need to do grade level to grade level. And when that all got mapped out and laid out, and that first year when we were validating it, the teachers just felt so prepared, the science teachers, and so ready to move through that curriculum. And it was a no-brainer as we moved through the other subject areas to do that system. And we had teachers volunteer to be part of the subject area committees. And the teachers that weren't on those committees but taught those subjects, we do monthly meetings with if there's anything new. We've kind of tweaked a little bit along the way, but the communication part is really important, but the systems part that CLI laid out really makes it a nice flow, and teachers have that buy-in because they're part of that curriculum writing process.
I love to hear that. It sounds like when the process is clear and teachers kind of know what to expect and kind of have that comfortability with the direction where you're going, and that we're all kind of aiming for the same piece, it sounds like the buy-in flows naturally after that versus maybe not having a solid approach and kind of throwing around ideas. It sounds like the CLI model has been helpful in kind of, I guess it's your North Star, right? That's where everybody's aiming towards. We all know what we're working towards. I thought it was interesting you said too that you were horizontally aligned, but not vertically. So kind of thinking through like, we've done this work, but that's what's next. It's like a little self-assessment there to figure out where to start. I'd love to hear from Jody next, kind of the same question. Jody, how did Superior go about prioritizing standards? I know Dr. Kupta started in science. Like, what did that process look like for you all as you evaluated the resources that you were using and how they aligned to the standards that you had prioritized?
Yeah, hi, welcome, or thank you for having us. We actually started with the subject area of math in our district. We knew that we needed to be having more number sense in our instruction and just have some changes made in how we were teaching and what we were teaching. So we identified math as our first subject area. Like others have said, it's a very involved process. So there's no way that you can tackle all the subjects and do all the things for every subject area all at once. So you really do have to kind of prioritize and decide what you're going to start with. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And that was tricky for me because I like to get things done quickly. And so, really remembering to be patient and put in the good work ahead of time so that the outcome can be positive at the end. We really, at the beginning of our process and journey with CLI, we really had to have a mindset shift within our staff and our administration at the time that the curriculum is what you teach as far as what skills you're wanting your students to be able to know and do, what those outcomes and components are. And the resource is the tools, the purchased curriculum sometimes that we use to teach our local curriculum. And that was a different mindset shift for most of the people in our district. And now that we've made that shift, we're definitely seeing people understand the importance of we're going to teach what we're going to teach at Superior schools, and how we get there can look different, depending on the needs of the kids or the style of the teacher. And just through that process, we built our local curriculum for math. We gave it a try with the resource that we currently had in our district and found that resource was not meeting our needs, which we predicted would be the case. But we were able to then select a resource that better aligned with our curriculum and just fit our needs then better for what we knew we wanted our students to be able to know and do.
I love that mindset shift that you mentioned. We teach what we teach, but how we get there can look different. From a leadership perspective, I think kind of modeling that seems like such a powerful way to relate to your staff, what you're working through and setting those expectations for, the flexibility of the process, but doing the work. Mm-hmm. Dr. Lang, I know we've talked a little bit about prioritizing standards, kind of looking at that alignment. As we discuss this, I'm kind of thinking about this question: can you cover every standard? And we know that the process of unpacking standards is something that educators are familiar with, right? Like identifying skills that students need to demonstrate, and that can guide our decisions. But I guess what I'm curious and would like to hear from you about is the shift that I've heard moving from unpacking to rebundling. What does that look like in practice? Is that something that you're familiar with? How did that look in your school? I'll just kind of toss it to you to share more about that concept of rebundling standards.
Yeah, thanks, Kendall, and thanks for the invitation. I'm humbled and honored to be on this panel with these great educators. We've been utilizing CLI as a curriculum, instruction, and assessment framework for governance in Glenwood Community School District since 2013. So we're heading into year 12, and it's been an amazing journey. And what's been great to witness is that organizationally speaking, we have laid a foundation for both a loose and tight framework for developing and prioritizing the essential learning, what we call outcomes in our curriculum system, and then being able to develop systems to be in place to actually intervene and enrich students based off what we have prioritized. And so it's been a great journey for our district. I haven't been here for all of it. I've only been here for 6 years, but I came in at a great time in 2019 because our teams have done full curriculum designs in our entire district. We have over 200 curriculums that have been totally customized and designed by our teacher teams, which we call subject area committees. You've heard that being referred to. And so all of our teachers write all of our curriculum in an ongoing manner. We have a 10-year plan. It's called the long range plan that we review and do a program evaluation. In fact, just last evening, we had a curriculum coordinating council meeting, which is a part of the governance model, to start to do a program evaluation on our K-12 ELA program, and just looking at what's working, what's not working well, how do we meet the needs of our students going forward for the next 6 years. And so to your point about prioritizing standards, Bob Marzano in the late 90s already did some great research and publication about it would take about 20 years to teach all the standards that an average student would be exposed to in probably most states in the United States. And I don't know about you, but I don't think there's any student, much less any teacher, that wants to have a student go through our K through 22 system. And frankly, what's scary about that is, that research suggests that that's how long it would take to just teach the standards. But we have a higher calling and responsibility to our students in education. It's not just to teach the standards, but to actually make sure they learn them. And of course, great research by John Hattie and others around visible learning and what actually works tells us that we have to be able to pause and have intervention time and being able to meet the needs of all of our learners. And one of the things I appreciate about the CLI system is that it allows us to prioritize the learning into localized outcomes based on a set of state or national standards so that we can do that. And in fact, an analogy we often use of why it's important for us to do that is it would be like a doctor having to treat 25 patients all with the same cure. That sounds not very smart and probably not great for the patients. And in our analogy, the students are our patients. And so we know they're at all different places of the learning. And we know that if we've done a great job of prioritizing our learning outcomes, that we can set a pacing guide that's reasonable within the 13 years that we have our students to actually be able to make sure that the learning endures, and that we have set up a pacing system that will actually allow us to intervene and even enrich and go deeper in that we've chosen outcomes that actually leverage into learning other standards within our state or within a national set of standards.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize what we've talked about here in this curriculum phase of the model. And here's what I'm hearing. Evaluate where you're at now as a team. Identify areas of opportunity to improve. From there, pick that content area where you're going to start the process. It's just like you have to start small, right? I think it was Jody who said it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So pick that area you're going to start, then build your team, get buy-in, build a team of teacher leaders with administrators. Don't do this just alone as an administrator, and use the systematic approach that we've talked about here. Of course, we have to prioritize, as Dr. Lang was elaborating on there. We can't reasonably teach all those standards, but we prioritize and then we pace so we can intervene and enrich. And that really is the curriculum phase there. We're gonna kind of transition here now to think about, okay, you've got your standards. Now, how do you measure progress towards meeting those standards so that instruction can be relevant and challenging, as Dr. Lang was alluding to there? Stacey, I'd love to just kind of toss it back to you as we move into this assessment phase. I know we condensed curriculum, that very long process, into a short 20 minutes, but kind of thinking about the assessment component, can you talk a little bit more about the types of activities that you see teams working with when they're engaged in the assessment phase of the CLI model?
Definitely, Kendall, but I do want to compliment you on how well you summarized the process. We have trouble summarizing that, and you did an exceptional job, so thank you. And I'm glad it's recorded so I can keep that. So with the assessment piece, the first step is to have a validated curriculum with solid measurable learning targets. So after that has been validated, then we provide assessment literacy to the district based on the district requirements. And so as part of the governance piece, the governance group determines whether or not they want proficiency skills that identify the priorities or learning progressions. And we utilize that in our assessment planning. So specific attention is paid to content and verb level of the curriculum, of the learning targets, because we want to truly align our assessments to the curriculum. And so we spend time discussing the type of assessment question that would be appropriate based on the rigor of the curriculum. So it might not always be selected response. It might be constructed response, product, or performance. We provide some PD with our training on how to take that curriculum with the priorities and create a proficiency scale or a learning progression. We also provide some support in developing the correct scoring tool based on what it is that we're wanting to measure. And then we also emphasize a common administration set of guidelines. That way, all teachers will be providing the same set of support for students that are receiving the assessment. And it's not only for that year, but year after year. So there's quite a bit that goes into this, but this is usually where the aha sets in. Oh, that's why we talked about verbs. That's why we were emphasizing we need to have the rigor here and selecting the correct type of question.
That was super helpful as a start there. I know we're going to talk about proficiency scales a little bit later. I think folks will be interested there, but I think that's really a great way to communicate where students are in relation to those standards based on that rigor. And yes, I agree, especially with high stakes testing, selected response isn't the experience there. So sometimes that's just not the way we have to go. We all have to be able to write a constructed response independently at some time, even if we don't want to. Can't all be multiple choice. I do want to toss it to Dr. Kupta again. Can you share more about the process that you all went through to align assessments to your curriculum? I'm really curious about like the scope and sequence. What, was this done in all subject areas? Was the process iterative? What did that look like at Penoyer?
Sure. So as Chad had mentioned, Penoyer also has a long range plan. So we did go through with every subject, aligning the curriculum, validating the curriculum, writing assessments. And as I mentioned earlier, having that time to come back and tweak things. We had a couple curriculum mandates in Illinois that came through that made us have to do some changes for social studies a couple years ago that was not part of the 10-year plan, but just being flexible and being able to come back at looking at your assessments and being able to have those data review times to know, like, are these assessments meaningful? Are we getting the information we need? And if not, do we need to go back and look at that scope and sequence in that curriculum, move some things around, reteach, or have more time on certain subject areas? So we really take a lot of time to look at that and discuss that. Our subject area committees do meet regularly, as well as our department chairs that kind of oversee the curriculum development along with the administration. So even if we're not on cycle for a particular subject area to do writing as assessments or curriculum review, we are still talking about the data from the assessments and looking at the students, because every year to year, the students are different and we got to make sure we're meeting them where they're at.
Absolutely. And as you said that, I had a great question from one of our attendees here that I just want to quickly ask you while we're on the topic. I think this will probably be something on a lot of folks' minds. When you're thinking about, you said meeting students where they're at, what about for students in those structured classrooms or self-contained classrooms where there might be students with special needs? How did your team's approach kind of take into account the needs to expose all students to the same grade level content really as their peers, while also understanding that their needs are different?
Sure. Thanks, Kendall. I really appreciate that, because it is very important that we're exposing all students to the standards and the curriculum. So we actually do run a multi-needs program here for our area special ed cooperative. And the way that we're structured with that is they are self-contained rooms. We have a K2, 3, 5, 6 through 8. So that team of teachers, our special ed teachers, have been working through the CLI process. Of course, the students are more assessed on their IEP goals, but that exposure is so important. And because they're a multi-age level classroom, you know, they can't just do the same thing year after year for science or math. So we've been working the CLI process with that and really looking at if a student's in the structured program, they are having exposure at some point to that grade level content while they're in those grade level grade bands. So it was really my special ed teachers breaking down what they felt was really important to pull out, what was relevant to the students in those classrooms, and curriculum mapping that and having a scope and sequence around so that those students are always going to get what their typical peers are getting, that exposure, that in that time.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. As a former special education teacher, I couldn't agree more. I am going to toss it to Dr. Lang. When we chatted before this, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You shared a statement with me that I thought was really powerful. You said you can't hit targets you can't name. In regards to this connection right here that we're talking about between curriculum and assessment, I'm curious if for the group here, all of our attendees, if you could kind of elaborate on that connection between clear learning targets, assessments, and then perhaps even the use of proficiency scales when we think about that target students are aiming.
Well, thanks for the question, Kendall. You hit my jam now. This is a part of the process that I'm super passionate about. Aligned assessments, when you've done the great work to write a prioritized, articulated curriculum that's both guaranteed and viable for all students, and we really do mean all students. I appreciated Kristen's summary of how you can go about doing that. Then what's so important is to not unravel all that great work by having a misaligned tool, something that's not valid to measure and nor not reliable. Because every assessment that you do is producing some sort of data, which is either going to form in an instructional decision or impact a summative evaluation of a score, which could relate to a grade, a placement, an intervention. And so it's super important that we're using aligned tools that actually give us the data that we can do some things with and don't cause harm actually to students. And I'm passionate about that. And I think and you look around your everyday part of your life, we know the damage of using an inappropriate assessment tool to really try to report what it is that a child can know or do. I mean, think about if we used a multiple choice exam like many driver's license exams throughout the United States to license our airline pilots. I don't know that I'd feel real comfortable flying any more than I do now if that was the case, because really that's an inappropriate assessment to do 20 multiple choice questions to determine whether you can fly an airplane. We actually need them to fly an airplane. And so they use simulators and they demonstrate competency through actually doing the task at hand. And so when we analyze the alignment between the assessment and the curriculum, Stacy talked about this and others, it's so important to identify what's the intent of the standards, what's the instructional intent, but what's the assessment intent of the rigor of your standards. And so often I see, and we have worked through a lot of these challenges in our district where we have this reluctance to go towards a resource-produced assessment battery or even a whole assessment. And the challenge with that is not that there's not some good stuff in those resources, but is it actually aligned to the intent of your local curriculum and standards and not for another state or multiple states even, or even antiquated standards. So one of the things we've done in our district over the years has developed a proficiency scale for every outcome. So it sort of lays out an instructional progression of learning of targets that have been translated into a student-friendly version. So what our research tells us from John Hattie's work on visible learning is that when a student can identify where's the target, what might that look like, what's the goal within a larger outcome in its parts, can I identify where I am? And then that discrepancy between where I am and where I want to go really leans into that goal-setting feature. So utilizing all forms of assessment, but just thinking about, you need to have aligned tools that are providing great feedback to students through self-assessment, peer assessment, and of course, teacher feedback. And then also being able to be great communicators to the students and their parents and guardians about where they're at and where they want to go. So we have a really growth-oriented approach from Carol Dweck's work instead of a deficit-minded approach. What don't you know? What don't you have? And we get to do all of that without ever lowering the bar of expectations for learning skills and content.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Sorry, I was struggling to find my mute button there. Thank you. That was super helpful. You talked a little bit about how important it is to really measure learning and get the data from the assessments that you need to plan instruction, which kind of gets me to start thinking about the different types of touch points or assessments that we give to students. And Jody, I'm curious at Superior, when we think about assessments, I always think of like formative, summative. We've talked about, some common assessments that students are taking at the end of the unit of instruction. But at Superior, how do teachers balance formative and summative assessments so that they do have that data to understand where students are, but aren't necessarily over assessing students or hitting that assessment fatigue?
Yeah, that's a great question, because nobody wants to give more tests and grade more tests than we need to, right? The first thing we really did was we took a deep dive into what our grading practices are. So what are our beliefs? What do we value as far as grading goes? We have adopted kind of the practice that homework is not graded. It is just an opportunity for students to practice what they've been taught, and it's a non-risk situation. And so their homework isn't graded, and that was a change that we had to work through. And then we think more about our grading as the checks for learning. At the formative levels, sometimes we're checking to see how they're doing just to guide our instruction, and that's not graded either. But then sometimes we're checking to kind of see where they're at towards that mastery level. So some of our formatives are graded, some of them are not. And that is decided at each grade level because these are common assessments. And that, I'm going to go off script here a little bit because Devin had a question in the Q&A for us that I think this kind of answers. So I hope that's okay. He had asked, like, how do you make sure people are doing this and it's not just them doing what they want with their own individual resource and say they followed it? Devin, part of this process is that we have what are called common assessments. So at the 4th grade level, for example, there are 4th grade assessments that all students are given every single year. It doesn't matter who the 4th grade teacher is. It doesn't matter as teachers come and go. Those are the assessments that we have written that are aligned specifically to our curriculum. And so if the kiddos aren't doing well on those assessments, we're going to know that. The individual teachers that come and go don't change what we're teaching or how we're assessing it. And so that helps with that fidelity piece. And then finally, as far as, over assessing, when we're done with a teachable unit, then we do give that summative assessment as well. That kind of brings everything all together. And that's how we check for that final check for mastery.
Thank you. And thank you for popping in Devin's question. That was a perfect time to squeeze that in. I appreciate it. As you talk about formatives and summatives, I haven't seen this question come in, but I'm betting that people are starting to wonder, how do we communicate progress? What types of grading methods are you all using? I want to make sure that we leave ample time to talk about the instruction phase last year. But before we do that, I'm just hearing so much about this important data that we're capturing to really paint the picture of how students are, moving towards these established targets that we've already taken the time to really align. How does everyone communicate student progress towards those standards? Dr. Kapta, can you tell us a little bit more about how grading is structured at Penoyer?
Sure. So we had a very traditional grading system with a report card, A, B, C. And when we started to move towards our CLI process, we realized our parents really needed, and our students really needed and deserved to have the information about those learning standards, where they're at, and be able to have that opportunity to continue learning them if they needed time. So we did move to standards-based grading. And that move, we are a little bit more on the traditional side here. That move did take time, not only with our teachers and our students, but our families. So we started, just like with our long range plan, we started with the first subject area that we started with science. So we broke it down. We, spent a lot of time explaining to the students how they were being assessed. We worked a lot with the teachers. We had some family nights on it. And really the outcome was very appreciated, that students are being assessed for what they're learning and having that opportunity to continue to grow in those areas year to year. And it has evolved as well. As Jody and Chad mentioned, that we have these curriculum councils where we have teachers, parents, board members, community members. We're starting to find now maybe we need another category to our grading. That's not to show that we don't have enough information on that student. We do have students that come in and out of the district, and sometimes we haven't just had enough time to teach something to a student, and it's not fair to grade them yet on that. So we've really been open and flexible with it, making sure that what we're communicating to parents and students from on our end is truthful about their learning and their journey as a learner.
That I loved what you said. Our students and families deserve to know where they are, and it's really that simple. And I think that's why we have to just keep pressing and keep evaluating what we're doing. Is it enough? Can we do more? And like you said, we might need another category. The process doesn't stop. It's something that we have to just continue resurfacing as we identify areas of opportunity. Jody, same question to you. How has Superior approached communication of progress towards those learning targets that your team defined?
Yeah, very similarly, I believe we also had a very traditional grading model. Students were either in elementary at the lower levels getting an S for satisfactory, or an S minus, or an N for needs improvement. At the upper levels in the elementary, they were receiving just a percentage grade. And as we developed our curriculum and had our outcomes and components and got into the assessment piece of it, we very much saw that standards reference grading was a great option for us. And it has really changed the way our teachers teach and how our parents are able to really know what their kids can and can't do. We're able to really drill down to very specific skills and really pinpoint that. So instead of a parent getting a report card that says 89% in reading, we're able to really communicate to them what parts of the ELA curriculum they are and aren't, mastering at this point. For us, we needed to find a way to kind of house all those assessments and give parents access to those assessment results, both live, as the kids are taking them, but then also at the end of whatever grading period we want. And that's actually when we moved to using Otis. We decided that Otis was the platform that we would be able to use to both administer those assessments and house all of that data. So that was how we got from CLI to Otis.
Love the connection there. Dr. Lang, I want to toss it to you next just to hear a little bit more about grading in your district and what that looks like. I know you talked about some of the research and best practices. Do you all fall in line in the thinking of how you communicate student progress to students and families?
Yeah, we do. And we're very aggressive, I suppose, in reform and change, that as this district had moved towards the CLI model, they also said, now is a great time to be better aligned in our communication about what students can know or do to parents and guardians, and adopted a standards reference grading mindset. And we're still humming along today and working all the time as a part of our school improvement process. It just makes sense. And I know it's not easy, and certainly we wouldn't say that it is, but when you're going to unpack and unwrap curriculum in a way that is organized by learning outcome, it focuses a conversation about feedback around learning over earning. And so we have a straightforward grading system of 4 equal interval levels of exceptional, proficient, minimally proficient, and not yet proficient. And we write proficiency skills. And then we define the descriptions of clarity, of quality, and consistency of each learning outcome. And then we adapt those to the developmental appropriateness of the student and of course, the content as students get older. We really try to lean into those to again, tap into some high-level achievement strategies from Hattie's Visible Learning about self-reporting of grades is one of the top 3 things you can do to increase academic achievement. And so it gives a visible, tangible template for a student and parent to be able to track. And one of the things I love amidst some of the challenges about grading reform when you're moving towards more standards-based reporting is that you're actually sharing way more information about what a child can know or do. And we have that obligation or responsibility to be great communicators using our professional opinion and a judgment of predetermined criteria for success, to set goals and then to be great communicators on how to get better. And instead of playing the game of school and chasing, arbitrary points, like feeling like we're a vending machine of, points and percentages and extra credit and all the other things that can get thrown into what Susan Brookart calls hodgepodge grading, really focus on clear learning targets. And do I or do I not have evidence to show and demonstrate that where I'm at and where I want to be as a student, and really to summarize our standards reference grading process. What we're trying to do as educators is verify proficiency of what a child can know or do, or young adults, or even an adult, depending on how old they are in our process. Now, getting into the weeds of what that looks like, that can vary depending on the context of your school district, as Kristen pointed out, but there's a lot of options to go there, and anything you can do to lean towards more equitable grading practices as well. We talked about learners of all different backgrounds. I think it's really important to make sure that we're providing grading and feedback that provides an equitable opportunity for understanding what the targets are in advance, and understanding what scaffolds and supports and enrichment I might need to be able to get to the goals where I want to be, and sometimes my parents too. So I feel like that's been a great game changer for us. Again, we're never without our bumps and bruises, but everywhere where we run into a snag, we feel like we can have that opportunity to get better and be more clear and transparent to be better communicators. Because at the end of the day, grades are a temporary indicator of what a child can know or do, and they are a form of communication.
Absolutely. It sounds like even though each leader may do things slightly different at their schools in terms of like the language or the number of levels on their proficiency scale, the goal is the same: communication, clarity, and helping students really own and understand their growth. As we move into the last phase of kind of thinking about that instruction piece, and then we'll open it up to some questions here shortly. Some big takeaways that I'm having from these other phases is that really an assessment that is not valid is not going to measure where your students are, and it's not going to give you as educators or school leaders the data that you need to really plan that instruction and continuously improve teaching. As Dr. Lang alluded to there, we do have a responsibility to know where our students are so that we are responsive to their needs and can ensure that truly equitable educational experience. For many districts, these types of conversations, these important instructional conversations, occur in PLCs, whether that's then analyzing student data, class data, looking at alignment. PLCs are really kind of the glue that I think holds this whole conversation together, because we come together in these PLCs to really look at what we're doing, if it's working, and what we need to do next. So I'm just curious, I'd love to kind of hear from everyone what type of model you all have in place for getting teachers together to look at data, and how that might impact instruction. I know PLCs can take a while to implement, and it's not easy to find common planning time. It's one of the most difficult things, I think, in all my years of teaching. I only had common planning time like 1 out of 7. So it is difficult to implement, but that's the goal, right? If we can get everybody together, we can have those conversations. Jody, what does your team do to get together to really look at the data and plan meaningful instruction? Anything to share around like a PLC model that might be useful to our audience?
Yeah, we needed to do some changes or adjustments to our elementary schedule in order to make that happen. And we were able to do so. And our teachers have 1 hour every day, 55 minutes technically, where the grade level students are at music and PE. And so every day, every grade level has that common planning time where they're able to meet with each other. Again, we are a small district. We have 2 sections per grade level at the elementary, but those 2 teachers really work together daily, both to plan their instruction, to look at their assessment data, make adjustments along the way. We have some times built in our schedule as well for some intervention and enrichment time. And so the teachers really are able to use the data, again, from their common assessments, because they're both testing the same thing, even if they maybe have some different instructional methods or kind of ways to get there, they're assessing the same thing with, what the kids are able to know and do in our curriculum. And then they're able to use that. Once a week, we have a PLC where the grade level teachers, along with myself and the specialists in the building, our title teacher, our special education teacher, our reading specialist, once a week during that common planning time, we all meet together into a team PLC meeting where we look more specifically at student data, grade level data, classroom data, to make decisions and change what we're doing. But really, our teachers have the opportunity every day to plan together and work together, and that has been a game changer as well.
I can't imagine. That's super powerful that you've been able to provide them with that, I'm sure. And I love that you're a part of the process too. It sounds like kind of popping in and still being there to listen, support, and be an advocate for their needs beyond just kind of getting everybody set up through the initial process, that buy-in. We have to model what we want, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
All day.
We have to be a part of it.
Yep. One day a week. I'm in PLC meetings all day. And that's tough to give up that time in the office, but has been very powerful in helping build the capacity in others and helping everyone along the process. So.
Thank you. Dr. Lang, I know when we first started, we mentioned that you all have received some recognition. Excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied today. Received some recognition, lots of R's there, around your PLC model. Anything to share around what your team is doing in their PLCs to really look at data and plan that meaningful, engaging, rigorous instruction?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably a lot more time than what I have, but certainly I'd be happy to go offline with folks that want to know more. We've been just really blessed to preserve up to 2 hours of collaborative team time every week, or nearly every week of the school year for our collaborative teams. Our entire school is a professional learning community. The adults are doing the professional learning so they can be better for our students and really just lean into data. We lean into what does the data tell us, and the great marriage, and you can see this on the CLI website, the great marriage between the CLI process and we use the PLC at Work framework, there are others, is there's a collaborative approach to determining what does success criteria look like, what does proficiency look like, and that leans into helping out your assessment reliability. Someone mentioned the teacher lottery. We really reduce that, and that's great for equity of our students. Success means success wherever we go in third grade math. But the key is leaning into the data and then creating fostering a culture of trust. So we're working together and we're leaning to what the data says about what works for our kids, and we should just do more of that. And so that embraces both the loose and tight of the frameworks. The loose part is we get to lean into teacher autonomy and really recognize skills instructionally that work for some kids or different groups of kids or all of our kids, and the data will lead us there. And so there were some questions in the chat about, how do you make sure? I think the error where a lot of districts go off is they get real tight from the top down and they basically prescribe the instruction. And that just, the downstream effect of that negatively, of course, is that teachers feel a loss of professionalism. They feel a loss of autonomy within their classroom, but that comes within fences, right? We have to be able to be accountable to our students. And so that's where that accountability through data comes. And it doesn't have to be super fancy or formal. It could be tallies on a sheet of who had it, who got it, who didn't get it, and what are we going to do tomorrow? So I think just aligning that, what's called a balanced system of assessments, from formative assessment on the fly to benchmark assessments to what we call outcome assessments in our CLI system.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Dr. Kupta, I think when we chatted earlier, you had mentioned that you all were working towards a PLC model. And I suspect that there's a lot of other school leaders here who might be in a similar position. Can you just tell us more about what your plan entails and what the goal is for your school with PLCs, especially thinking about other administrators who might not have this figured out yet, but are working towards it as well?
Sure. So we're definitely moving towards formalizing a PLC model. But I will say, after going through the whole cycle of CLI with all subject areas, and like I mentioned, we did it with our special education. We also did it with fine arts. So every subject area had that opportunity to go through the CLI process. Our teachers now have that vehicle to have those discussions about students, about data, about curriculum, about alignment and changes that need to be made. And we're very fortunate to be small. Our teachers have opportunities during the day where they do have plan times that are common. We also do an early release once a week that allows for about 45 minutes of common plan time. And I think it just really has been very organic and natural for a lot of teachers to take that time, talk about students, talk about data, and look at where they need to make changes in the curriculum. I think our next step really is to do training on that for teachers and have systems in place. I think it's really hard when you set expectations and people just aren't there yet. So that professional development and training is very important, and just giving time to teachers to be able to do that. And sometimes you have to model for them. Sometimes they need help, and other times they're ready to go, and it's just they're out there doing it already, and they don't even know it's a PLC. So we're in those stages where we are trying to formalize it. But again, just like the CLI process, we're really going to take our time and make sure that we have buy-in and that we're providing that professional development for our teachers.
Absolutely. And I think a common theme across every leader here is that you all are doing the work too. It's not that top down. It really is an engaging and collaborative process, which I think is a testament to the success that you all are experiencing, and likely the teacher morale as well, because I think it was kind of alluded to before, what starts to happen when you don't have ownership over your work and involvement in the process. I know we are nearing the end of our time here. I want to get to at least one question that was pre-submitted here with our panel. We had lots of questions around secondary teachers, so that will be the question I toss to the panel before we wrap it up. But before we do that, I just want to make a quick connection back to Otis, our webinar sponsor for today. I know you heard a few mentions of Otis throughout. There's two areas that you should keep in mind that Otis can really support instruction and assessment with your district. Otis has common assessments that would be extremely well aligned to the conversation we've had today. We have standards aligned assessments in Otis. You can build your own or share those out to other team members while controlling the assessments in terms of like what can be edited and copied. So from a common assessment standpoint, Otis has lots of tools to support that work so that when you give students an assessment, you have a wealth of data at your fingertips. Really great for getting everyone on the same page in those PLCs, because the last thing you want to see is your PLC spending the time collecting the data and not actually being able to use it. I know I've been in those meetings where you spend an hour going through the data and then you're like, oh, the time is over. So common assessments with Otis is something to keep in mind. And we did touch on grading. This is really an area where Otis excels in terms of that communication of proficiency. If you are considering any kind of mastery tracking, Otis is a great solution to consider. We do have all of our assessments can be aligned to learning standards. So you can really see where students are in relation to those targets that you've set. There's a standards gradebook that tracks it all for you. You can even generate some reports to look across assessments at where students are progressing towards those skills that you've identified as a part of the CLI model that we've been talking about today. So I won't cover Otis anymore, but you can learn more about us at otis.com. Really, all of our tools are well aligned with the conversation that we've had here, no matter if you're just getting started with aligning your curriculum or deep into mastery tracking. There's definitely some options there that would be worth checking out. But before we wrap up, I want to do at least one question just around secondary, because we didn't dig into this too much, but I'm curious if anyone on the panel has advice. We saw lots of comments come in earlier around addressing hesitations among secondary staff who might be sharing like, we already do this process, or we've been doing this for years. And I think this applies to not just secondary, but how do you all suggest administrators, approach this process so that educators don't just see it as one more thing that's added to their plate? How do you get staff buy-in, whether at the secondary level or at the elementary level? Does anyone want to tackle that very large question for the last question here?
I'm happy to jump in. There's a lot of different ways you could go about doing that. One of the things I would recommend is who are your fast starters in your staff and organization that can be a pilot, whether it's a department, whether it's a lead teacher on each team, and lead towards the practices that you desire. Get a guiding coalition put together of educators in your school organization that want to lean towards better practices that are more equitable and clear for students, and get some time back to really be able to ensure that learning's happening and not just coverage. I think every teacher gets into the business to help students and kids. And if they want to be in a position to be able to have more evidence and understanding of where they can diagnose and treat really and support learning and make learning fun and engaging, you got to have the time to do that. And I think having an opportunity to find some leads, lead forward and lean into them. Adult learners want to see experiential learning. They want to hear it from their colleagues. They don't want to hear it from you. necessarily. And so sometimes if you can just generate a little bit of a positive experience within your school, and you could say, don't take it from me or this researcher or this author, but let's lean into what they have to say and what are the bumps and bruises for the nuance of our school. You can generate some good steam there. So trying not to do it all at once and having a planful way of moving forward a little bit at a time.
Thank you. That was super helpful to hear. Does anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
I would like to. And this
Please.
is just sometimes when we're asked to provide support, we'll go to a district and there are concerns because it is change. It is second order change. And so, educate sometimes, and you've all heard this, we have to go slow to go fast, but educate, be transparent, listen to the concerns, and answer the questions honestly and openly, and provide the research for best practice.
Thank you. And I just want to call out, Stacey, where can folks get in touch with you? Because throughout this process of planning for this webinar, you have been so knowledgeable, and obviously you've worked with all the leaders on this. Where can folks get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the CLI model and are just kind of curious about evaluating, like, is this a fit for my school based on where I'm at?
Definitely. Thank you, Kendall, for that opportunity. Yeah. There are a couple of ways. Our website is cliweb.org.
I'm going to put that in the chat for you.
Yes, that would be excellent. Thank you. Or they could reach out. I could provide a phone number that they could also call and leave a message if that would work.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah, if you want to type anything else in the chat there, I put cliweb.org in the chat there. Yes. Lots of good resources and information that can really just be used. And these folks have obviously a wealth of experience and knowledge to share. So if nothing else, like, this is a great panel to just circle back to what was shared here and bring that back to your team as ideas for really getting that buy-in and fueling this process in your district. I want to thank our panel for taking time to be here. It's a busy time of year. Everyone, I'm sure, has a fully stacked calendar and agenda and PLC meetings to get to. So just thank you, everyone, for making time to share what you've learned. And one thing that was clear is this is a process. We're always evaluating, we're always getting better. And if we continue to chat with each other and learn from one another, we can all kind of maximize and value or get value, from the work of others. So just thank you for being here. And it was a lovely webinar. I appreciate everyone's time. Stay warm if you're in the Midwest or wherever you are. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.